but I think we will begin.
No, wait for them then. Then wait for them. You can maybe begin your opening remarks.
Okay.
Let them join in, but then you begin your opening remarks, and as when they join in, take the picture of
Sure.
everybody. Ha.
Yeah, absolutely, ma'am. Okay. All right. So, good afternoon, everyone, once again, and I welcome all of you to the third panel on caste, class, gender, and marginality. So, we have had a series of very successful panels, and we have had very interesting discussions, and we hope that this panel and the discussions that ensue will be very helpful and will enrich all of us. So I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome the chair for this panel, Dr. Saroj Kumar Mahananda, Associate Professor at Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. So we are so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today, and and for gracing us with your presence. So before I hand over the time to Dr. Mahananda, I would like to briefly introduce him. So Dr. Saroj Kumar Mananda is a multilingual writer, translator, and critic. His area of interest includes Dalit literature and historiography, Indian writing in English, Uriya Dalit literature, translation and aesthetics, 19th century English literature, post-colonial literature, and Aboriginal literature. He has supervised and is supervising more than a dozen research scholars in as varied fields as British literature, post-colonial studies, marginal studies, Dalit studies, Aboriginal writings, folk literature, Hindi writings, poetry writings, and Oriya writings. Under the aegis of the UGC SAB DRS project at the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, he has translated the stories and non-fiction prose of Premchand into English. He is also currently engaged in the research and translation of Sambalpuri folk writings. Besides many scholarly articles on the broad area of Dalit studies, he has to his credit 3 books, namely Life in the Fringes, The Aborigines in Patrick Boy's Riders in the Chariot and a Fringe of Leaves, published in 2004, Caste, Reality, and Mediation, Articulation of Dalit Experience in Basudev Sunani's Select Writings, and published in 2017, and Duart's Dalit Historiography, published in 2017. He is also known for 2 edited books, Dalit Literature, Reading Resistance, published in 2013, and Dalit Literature and Historiography, published in 2014. So we extend our heartiest welcome to you, sir, once again, and I hand over the rest of the time to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such a very generous kind of introduction. You see, of course, being in the academics, one can't help doing things. So I don't really take pride in those things. They are all very regular matters. But then, thank you so much. And I must, before we proceed, I must thank the organizer and Dr. Brati particularly, and the way you people have done it. In fact, I was there in the very first inaugural session also, and it was wonderful to be with all those stalwarts and then listening to them. And it was really wonderful to begin with. And the very theme, the thrust itself is, as I, in fact, in my private conversation with Dr. Bhatti, I was saying, this is actually very near to my heart. And this is writings from the margin. I have been teaching writings from the margin in Jamia here. We have it in our CBC paper here in MA, and writings from the margin. We have this seminar paper, optional paper in our PhD. So it has been very near to my heart. And when Dr. Brady asked me to be part of this, I lamented that I could not actually present a paper because of many other reasons. But then I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much. And let's begin the session. And before we begin the session, a quick word to the participants, the paper presenters. we have, I think, 1 hour, approximately 1.5 hours. So with that, and we have 6 presenters. I think if we divide the time, then it will be something like 15, 16 minutes each. So I would request the participants to stick to their time of 10 minutes presentation. So if they can stick to the 10 minutes presentation, then we can have time for another 5 to 6 minutes discussion. In fact, because you see, all the good things that one actually tries to share with, they come up while discussing and sharing, and while people ask questions and prod you. So since I believe in that, and most of you would be also we would be believing in that. So let's please let's put this moratorium on us. Let's put 10 minutes self kind of imposed deadline for us, and thereafter we can kind of open up for discussion. If we have time left, then we can, of course, we can go on for more. And within that time, we can also not just only 6 7 minutes, but even 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it takes to go. So that will be my request at the very outset. So uh, because I am joining from the mobile, so right now I don't have here. I will need to go back to that again. So maybe uh, shall we go by the first the order that has been given?
Absolutely, sir. Yes.
So who is the first? I think Tanu is the first, I suppose. Yes, Tanu, unmute
Yes,
yourself
sir.
and
Good afternoon, sir. Very good afternoon to you.
good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yeah, let's start.
Okay.
So as I said, 10 minutes presentation, and then thereafter we kind of save the time for discussions. So try to stick to the timing. I will not kind of remind you people. Let's start.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. It's a sheer honor to be able to present in front of Dr. Suraj Kumar and all the audience, here. I will try to stick to the time limit and summarize my arguments quickly. So the title of my paper is Analyzing the Caste Gender Nexus in the Hindi Dalit Autobiographies of Kaushalya Besantri and Sushila Topkar. Now, the caste gender nexus, as the scholarship is front of us already. Ambedkar theorized the nexus of caste and gender in his 1916 essays, Caste in India, Their Genesis, Mechanism and Development. And later on, there have been scathing critique of many anti-caste intellectuals before Ambedkar as well, 19th and 20th century, such as Jyotirao Phule, Savitribai Phule, Periyar, Tarabai Shinde, Swami Achyutanand. And there have been several political and social movements spanning the entire nation, Dalit identity politics, that has revolutionized various issues at different points of time. And we can understand, the impact of these movements in the specific geopolitical locations as well, which has led to questioning of the homogeneous nature of the term Dalit itself, because time and again there have been scrutiny of the homogenizing tendency of movements, and how multiple voices have emerged, contested, counter resisted the appropriation of voices. Now, within this framework, I intend to study the caste gender nexus in very selected autobiographies of Dalit women that look at the area of multiple atrocities, especially when we see the nature of caste is intact, and how Dalit women and their positionality become extremely crucial, which renders them to multiple atrocities. The autobiographies by Dalit men and women have already provided a very rich source of socio-cultural and socio-political aspects of Dalit identity, and we have seen an increase in the autobiographies of women. Dalit identity discourse and politics has itself, widened, and has been asking, hitherto unaddressed questions of freedom, choice, expression, development. Especially, when we look at the position of Dalit women and how they negotiate their position in a casteist framework vis-a-vis patriarchy. Now, if we quickly take a glimpse at certain ways in which the gender nature of caste has been theorized. So we'll see Savarna feminists such as Uma Chakravarti, Sharada Chatterjee, again, highlighted the intersectional element, of the caste and gender nexus, and in fact have gone on to address the limitation of the pan-India feminist movement to address the issue of Dalit women. So from this, a very unique and peculiar Dalit women's perspective has emerged, which has been theorized, by these scholars. And a dedicated and robust scholarship now exists on the 20th century public sphere as well, around the existence of Dalit counter-public and as a literary counterculture. Now, here, one of the issues that we confront is the absence of women writers for a long time, and particularly if you look at the Hindi Dalit writing, that has certainly raised notional concerns about the representation of total reality of the Dalit discourse in Dalit literature, leading to discontinuity in shaping of a Dalit subjectivity. The autobiographies that are therefore under study in my presentation, they offer a genealogical model of Hindi Dalit literary sphere, and they challenge, the normative and the male-dominated terrain, that has started to shape up, towards the mid of the 20th century. And Hindi Dalit public sphere, unlike its western and southern, counterpublic, has also witnessed a lot of roadblocks. So the way, this is also an area that I intend to inquire, as I go on in the research, as the gaps, that we find within the Hindi belt, as opposed to the western and, southern counterpublic. One of the reasons could be the decline of the Adi Hindu mobilization. But recently, if we look at the scholarship of 20th century Hindi Dalit public sphere, fresh findings, and through archival work, we have been able to notice the presence of Dalit voices in the early 20th century Hindi heartland. For example, a 1915 story by Mohini Chamaran apparently qualifies as the first story to be written and published by a Dalit woman, making an important intervention in the Hindi Dalit public sphere. Hira Dome is already a popularly established first poet, icon of Bhojpuri literature, credited with creating the first poem about Dalits, Achut Ki Shikayat. Illuminating the scholarship on the vibrant Dalit public sphere during the 20th century, Tapan Basu, in his essay, Dalit Personal Narratives in Hindi, Reflections on a Long Literary Lineage, he remarks, and I quote him, "Indeed, life writing about eminent Dalit leaders gained currency immediately following Achyutanand's death in 1933. Several biographies of exemplary public figures among Dalits were brought out by press to the cause of the undercaste. Such archival discoveries have been able to bridge the gap in the understanding of Dalit subjectivities, their interplay with the public and private discourse, fashioning a unique consciousness based on self-identification and resistance jostling with art and politics. The significant study of Hindi Dalit counterpublic by Laura Brueck has unfolded a plethora of diverse literary styles and political expression, shaping the modern and contemporary Dalit discourse. In fact, an earlier study by Francesca Orsini, The Hindi Public Sphere, discusses at length the early 20th century nationalist period of Hindi literary and political sphere, highlighting oppositional discursive elements, indicating a flourishing existence of multiple public spheres. To add to it, Sarah Beth Hunt's Hindi Dalit public sphere also points out the rise of Dalit pamphlets, and Dalit pamphlet, literary counterculture is extremely indicative, of a counterculture that we see in the early decades of the colonial North India. Now, there has been a claiming of public space and demanding to be heard that has been quite significant in shaping of Dalit consciousness. And it is in this context that autobiographical expression emerges as one of the most significant genres, marking an important intervention by Dalits in the discourse of Dalit power. The autobiographical genre also heralds, this valorization of authentic Dalit experience and the classic debate of experience-based, articulation, over the non-Dalit, articulation of Dalit experience, that has certainly informed, a very interesting and nuanced dialogue, between, the priority of experience, and the politics of representation. And Ramnarayan Rawat here makes a very pertinent observation on the rise of Dalit studies, where the experience of growing up untouchable in Jati Mohallas was crucial to formation of Dalit consciousness. The rise of Hindi Dalit autobiographies as a source of Dalit cultural identity became especially important in North India. However, Dalit autobiographies do retain certain ambivalences, even as the authors struggle to reconcile their low caste identity with their current urban middle class status, and more recently, as their claims to represent all members of the Dalit community are challenged by the Dalits of the younger generation. We have also seen that how the 1990 post Mandal Commission, has been fundamental, in again bringing the discourse of caste as a public debate, and then later on, the emergence and the electoral success of Bahujan Samaj Party further politicized the identity and fundamentally altered the political landscape of North India. Well, the first Dalit autobiographies in Hindi were translations from the vibrant stream of Marathi Dalit literature. Dalit writers in the Hindi belt began to write their own life narratives from the mid-1990s. The most influential of these include Mohandas Nimishra's Apne Apne Pinjre, Om Prakash Valmiki's Chutan, both published in 1995 and 1997 respectively, Suraj Pal Chauhan's Tiraskrip. Moving on to the women autobiographies, we see Kaushalya Ben Santri's the first Hindi Dalit autobiography by a woman, published in 1999, and the second autobiography that I intend to look at is Sushila Taghore's, The Pain of the Trap, Shiganje Gadar, published in 2011. As the need for a more complex and nuanced perspective was felt, several analytical models developed to study Dalit women's autobiographies. The categories such as testimonial or narrative witnessing explored the first-hand account of oppression. This framework, however, and I'm borrowing from the scholarship that exists by Christy Merrill and Laura Bruegg, it oversimplifies the collective and relational, and specifically the gendered character of Dalit women's life writing. This overemphasizing of the gender perspective also effaces the narrative authority, purposefulness, and the perspectival control of its authors. So the defining and the shaping of a genre and reconfiguring the autobiographical genre itself has been a very interesting development, especially if we study the Hindi Dalit autobiographies by Besantri and Tagore both. And by looking at these autobiographies, and reading them against the grain, what we also see that we may be able to see that in these autobiographies, their gendered experience of caste complicate the typical linear trajectory of the narrative subject from the target of social oppression to politically awakened social subject, which has emerged as a meta-narrative in the collective voice of male-authored autobiographies that dominate the Hindi Dalit literary sphere. When we read Besantri and Taghore's narrative, it is very clear to us that testimonial, as a category to identify their work remains insufficient, which has over a period of time has become a comprehensive homogeneous category for Dalit women's writing. And when we look deeper into the narratives, what emerges is the interconnectedness of multiple generations of Dalit women who serve their stories as being told by Besantri and Tagore in their writings. They serve not to efface themselves as narrative subjects, but rather to advocate for an expanded understanding of the narrative subject. In both these autobiographies, the
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Please wrap up your paper as 10 minutes are up.
Right. The grandmother stories are very integral, and in fact, if you look at the beginning of the autobiographies, it's a very conscious act, that we see in place, the self-conscious narrator, writer of the autobiography, and the examination and description of the domestic labor. So these are the two domains, that we see dominating the narratives in both the autobiographies. And Tagore also, provides a very interesting objective and provides a genealogical map of women in the family, showcasing the inheritance and the difference in intergenerational saga. So we are given a very capacious vision and articulation of social and political developments. At the same time, a concretely felt, personalized sense of history, where originary reactions, are recorded, and a retrospective analysis is also given here. I would like to conclude my paper by again highlighting a very important aspect of autobiographical writing, which are seen as personal life narratives that underscore the change of the underscore background of changing times. And these narratives therefore document the world rapidly receding in the past and for recording personal testimonies. The identities that may emerge then may seem not as stable figures, but more importantly, as I observed, the various styles of inhabitation that surfaces as self narration. It links our previous argument that has encouraged me to focus on the formal and literary attributes of the autobiographies rather than essentializing them in a single or dominant mode of social or political discourse. And this is the last point. The effacement of the writers as narrative subjects is demolished, as our understanding of them as self-contained subject is enriched. Despite the commonality of their experiences as abused wives, the construction and subversion of the domestic sphere that they inhabit, in their seeming act of submission to male authoritative figures, recreates both the domestic and the public sphere as an important site for contestation and the creation of identity and community through their deeply personal accounts. Thank you.
Yes, that was a very wonderful way of looking at this gender, caste gender nexus. And in fact, so whenever one talks about casting, of course, one cannot look at this gender issue. And Tanu has brought out this, with this public sphere, and Francisca, and all these reference to. Uh, uh, if we have any questions, floor is open, or maybe if there is no question, people can write their comments or questions, observations in the chat box. We can come back. Do you have any questions, comments? Okay, if you don't have questions right now, maybe we can come back later on. Should we do that? People can write their comments or questions in the chat box.
I think that is okay. I think let's go to the next paper.
Yeah. So let's move to the next presentation. Next presentation is by. Let me take the name. Let me see. Here. Next presentation is. This is reading Kaveri Sumangali and Kusumegawal's Mangali, Hindi Dalit women writers by this is Abhinav Piyush. Do you have Abhinav Piyush?
Yeah. Can you? Good afternoon,
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Right. So I'll start with my paper straight away. Good afternoon to everyone. In fact, Tanu's paper. She's my fellow researcher at the Department of English in Delhi University here, and she has wonderfully set up the background against which I can take up a different question through two short stories of two prominent Dalit women writers. That is the inquiry into the domain of intersectionality of not just gender and caste, but also class, and which is where my paper comes in, and it looks at two of these short stories, and then I'll straight away jump into my paper, and we'll see. Okay. The normative events of Dalit life writings, such as the descriptions of the childhood, segregation of spaces, schools as the sites of caste discrimination, humiliations of elders, sexual exploitation of women, and everyday violence at the hands of the upper caste, find their articulation in early Hindi Dalit short fiction too. With the remarkable growth of Hindi Dalit fiction in the last few decades, works by Hindi Dalit feminist scholars such as Sushila Tagore, Rajat Rani Meeno, Amita Bhati, etc., and others have been successful in creating expansive paradigms of representation of Dalit women's experiences, while simultaneously questioning both anti-caste as well as feminist movement in India for disregarding Dalit women's marginality and experiences as an autonomous discursive category. Their writings have illustrated that rather than being constructed by the perennial otherization, victimization, and silencing non-Dalit and even Dalit male writings, Dalit feminine self sees itself as an enabled, consequential, and autonomous agency. This paper considers two short stories Sumangali and Mangali by two Dalit women writers, Kaveri and Kusum Megwal respectively, who bring further nuances to the study of marginality of caste and gender, with a pronounced emphasis on the intersectionality of caste and class and gender. By exploring the intersectionalities, the operative forces of socio-economic vulnerability and their overdetermination of the subjectivity of the Dalit women are also explored at length in this paper. Further, I have also considered these short fiction works by two Hindi Dalit women writers coming from two different parts of the Hindi region who contest how sexual violence and its representation has been dealt with in Dalit writings in general. While functioning under the critical frameworks of Dalit feminism, Hindu Dalit women writers have been articulate in recasting the mold of non-Dalit and male Dalit writings, which reduce the Dalit woman to a passive subject in jarring episodes of caste and sexual violence. These writers have given an alternative paradigm of capturing Dalit women's subjectivity both as victims as well as agents in their consideration of intersectional realities. Kaveri is a Bihar-born Hindi Dalit writer whose short story collection Dronachari Ek Nahi, not just one Dronachari, has now become a critically acclaimed volume in the Hindi Dalit literary sphere. Her two novels dealing with Dalit women's experiences, Shika and Miss Ramya, have also received wider circulation and critical attention. Her role as a literary and cultural critic is reflected in many of her writings on Ambedkar, education, and Dalit women's institutions published in several Hindi magazines. Her story summarily distorts the Dalit identity narratives, which foreground caste by almost sidelining the subject's position as a Dalit and portraying her primarily as a laborer in the labor-intensive construction sector. The protagonist is an orphan who is made to live as a concubine of the building contractor since her childhood. Her only companion being her dog, Mangi. Orphan Sugya lives along with other laborers in the same premises where construction work goes on. As a 12-year-old dependent living with the contractor, she is repeatedly brutalized and raped by the contractor. And the narrative chooses to construct the character of Sugya based on class belonging, where she completely lacks any kind of agency. This predominant class narrative is sustained throughout the story, where she is fatalistically condemned to be molested and raped because of socio-economic vulnerabilities and belonging. In the story, the only solace that Sugya has is from Dukhna and his mother. Towards the end of the story, even Sugya perishes, lying in pain, and with Mangi brooding about the end of her life. The equivalence that the narrative draws here with the animal completes the Sugya's subhuman characterization and victimization in the story. The equivalence perhaps justifies the title of the story where Sugya and Mangali form a compounded identity of Sumangali. It is the only relationship with sustained affection after the loss of Dukhna and his mother. In Hindi Dalit writings, the urban experience is mostly represented keeping in mind the educational claims to middle class belonging of the Dalit protagonist under the lens of Ambedkarite consciousness, where elements of modernity such as urbanity and education are the facilitators of politicized consciousness and social mobility. The uneducated, underclass and unskilled Dalit laborer is the representative figure of the multitudes of Dalits living in urban slums and experiencing casteist labor market is not made available the political and the emancipatory framework of Dalit Chetana. In Kaveri's story, the middle class centric literary imagination of Hindi Dalit writings is shunned in favor of an underclass experiential tale that brings together the vulnerabilities of caste, class, and gender. Interestingly, the Dalit identity of Sugya has also been effectively undermined for an overlapping caste class feminine identity. In Dalit women writings, this selective evocation of Dalit identity is not uncommon, as writers often choose to operate with a feminist consciousness. Such limited invocation of Dalit consciousness in the text has often been questioned and criticized by Dalit writers and theorists. It is seen as a deliberate ploy to seek parity with the non-Dalit women writers, who, while addressing feminist concern, sideline the differential concerns born out of intersecting identities of caste, class, and gender, and thus appear Brahminical and classist. On the other hand, authors like Kaveri adopt a very carefully crafted position by foregrounding the class vulnerabilities in some cases and patriarchal oppression in others, along with the questions of Dalit identity. The idea behind such positioning is to establish associations and develop solidarity with different oppressed groups. Rather than fracturing the Dalit movement, such an approach brings together multiple women groups to critically re-articulate class inequality, gender suppression, and caste injustices, and thus continues to expand the paradigms of feminism as well as Dalit writings in India. In this class-centric approach in Kaveri's narrative, Ambedkar's encouraging message for the Dalit population to move towards the cities, for anonymity is undercut by the vulnerabilities that the underclass population, Dalit population is exposed to on a daily basis. Unlike the tales of aspiring middle class migration for education or employment, the Dalit laborer is often a landless entity in the villages that makes seasonal as well as permanent migrations to cities for different reasons. In addition to that, lack of housing facilities, inaccess for health and care, denial of education, unpaid and exploitative employments, and bureaucratic and police excesses ensure that the working class women like Surya to be among the most destitute and deprived groups of people and thus highly vulnerable to sexual violence and exploitations of all kinds. What Kaveri chooses to foreground here is that the idea of urbanity is a very class-centric idea where expanding spaces and the arrival of modernity in its various avatars suits a consumerist elite class and aspiring middle class. Surya is very perceptive of it when she says that till the building gets ready, we get to experience the comforts of before war, and then soon enough all the bags and belongings get thrown away. The middle class experience, which drives the narrative of growth and development in Indian social spaces, is deeply rooted in this caste structure, often complicit in the exploitation and abuse of laboring underclass. Urban housing, public utilities, shopping complexes, and infrastructure in the ever expanding landscape of cities and towns are very exclusive manifestations of a consumerist society that continues to banish the wage laborers and informal sectors to the fringes and ghettos of the urban existence. The female child laborer, who has been represented through Surya, gets to experience multiple levels of exploitation and suppression because of her vulnerabilities. Kaveri's use of harsh realism in the narrative, even at the risk of completely sidelining the political and the literary framework of Dalit Chetana, which is ubiquitous in the Hindi Dalit writings, is also an inversion of the formulaic representation of Dalit women and sexual violence in the works of Hindi Dalit male authors. Laura Boyd writes that strategies of representing rape and sexual violence against women in Dalit literature has been to foreground brutalize Dalit women's bodies as catalyst for revenge narratives enacted by men and therefore fundamentally erasing women from the script. Kaveri does not provide any radical consciousness to her protagonist, but the narrative does not treat the character of Dalit women as a passive subject. Even if Surya remains socially and economically deprived from the beginning to the end of the story, there are moments in which, in the narrative, in which the young Surya tries to develop an articulate and conscious self. In her own disempowered and disenfranchised way, she tries to make bargains with the social and economic controlling structures. She develops solidarity with Dukma's mother, and when Minty pleads with the doctor to attend to her son, she looks forward to a fulfilling married life with Dukma. But after their death, she tries to even get in other relationships just to even seek patriarchal protection, unlike any other ideological prescribed role. Kaveri Surya offers her disempowered resistance to the overwhelming structures of class and caste in a complete absence of rights-based vocabulary, constitutional and welfare measures of the state, politicized identity, Dalit collectivity, to remain the central voice and the character of the story. Kaveri has been able to write her protagonist into voice and faint resistance from the relative silence and the absence of the non-Dalit as well as male Dalit literary works. Thus, Kaveri raises a question mark on the very idea of the Indian modernity itself, which has been defined through exclusions of all kinds. Kusum Megawal, on the other hand, she belongs to Rajasthan and she, in fact, has, like Kaveri, she's associated with academia and she has also worked on her PhD and now she's a recognized author in the Hindi literary sphere, having published in several magazines and journals. To her credit, Megawal has...
Sorry to interrupt you in between, sir.
Yeah.
Please wrap up your paper.
Yeah, thanks. So, Kusum Megawal has been credited for reformulating the Dalit feminist works beyond the narratives of exploitation and abuse. Now, the two short stories, Mangli and Sumangli, almost function as parallel narratives, even though their writers come from very different regions of Rajasthan and Jharkhand respectively. The stories the scale of financial deprivation, which is the default condition of a status as the wage laborer, functions in a similar manner in which Kaveri Sumangali, with the presence of a community around Mangali being the only difference. Citing mourning as a class privilege, Megawal goes on to remark that women from big houses mourn their husbands for years and 6 months. But Mangali could not. Uh, it seems that Kaveri's Kusu Megawal's Mangali subverts the mold of passive subjectivity that the early Hindi Dalit male writings often evoke in their treatment of Dalit women characters. Like Kaveri Sumangali, where Ambedkarite or Dalit consciousness is not made available to the protagonist, Megawal's Sumangali again remains a narrative where Ambedkarite consciousness is portrayed as a privileged positionality facilitated by the elements of modernity, constitutionality, and state's public policy. In male Dalit writings, Ambedkarite consciousness, which allows the character to identify caste oppression and transcend it, is often acquired after an epiphanic episode of caste oppression. On the other hand, these two works deal with female wage workers who even lie beyond the borderline of caste consciousness, that is, Jatiya Bodh. In Dalit experiences narrated in these stories include an exclusive critique of class belonging. They do not even attempt to reach a comprehensive understanding of the class belonging of the laborer. The text treats caste belonging as a deeply entrenched and complicit within the structures which perpetuate gender and class exploitation. Thus, the foregrounding of the intersectionalities of class, caste, and gender in these works of short fiction challenge the ideologically unified understanding of Dalit literature. It is important to notice that in order to render Meghawal's Mangli's act of resistance meaningful and social, the social and legal forces of community, police, and justice system are made to come together. It's a privilege that Subia is not allowed. Both characters are destined for silencing and erasure in the face of poverty and class oppression. Abhinay Ramesh introduces the concept of social safeguarding. He says that in Indian society, the caste hierarchy matters in deciding a person's claim to security and safety in public domain from patriarchal violence. Dalit women live under the perennial potential social insecurities and vulnerabilities as routine aspects of their lives. The concept of social safeguarding suggests that their location in the caste hierarchy protects and secures the lives of upper caste and class women, and conversely makes Dalit women insecure and vulnerable in the public domain. The argument that Ramesh seems to be making here is that there is a degree of inevitability that differing social spaces, when Dalit women are subjected to different kinds of violence, as inherent nature of Indian society is that of a caste-based public patriarchy. Caste patriarchy, on the other hand, and caste hierarchy continues to provide social and legal protection to non-Dalit women, even in the case of gendered violence. Now, to conclude, Meghawal's Mangli invokes her ancestry of being a daughter of a Bhil woman to reposition herself as an empowered agent and physically resist the sexual advances of the contractor. Laura Booth argues that this repositioning and transformation to that angry goddess at the end of the story constructs a new self-scripted social role that rewrites these stereotypical rape scripts. Hindi Dalit women writers have been recasting the mode of non-Dalit and male Dalit writings which reduce the women to passive subjects. Often the agency is shifted to the Dalit male who unleashes his rage in revenge. It must be pointed out that these female characters are trapped in the complexity of narrative reality, and the acts of individual resistance can only be limited in scope. These women are not able to exercise their roles as independent women, mothers, wives, due to the collateral damage caused by the socio-economics of caste, class, and gender. The idea of family is also not made available to both of them by these narratives. They do not come across as idealized Dalit characters of Hindi Dalit writings which function under the conceptual framework of Dalit Chetna. Such deliberate representational politics reconfigures the aesthetics of representation of Dalit women by several male Dalit and non-Dalit writings. Between Kaveri Subia, who suffers but resists, and Meghawal's Mangli, who unleashes a physical force to rewrite the rape script, lies the potential to explore the complexities of Dalit womanhood, subjected to intersectional oppression. However, both Kaveri and Meghawal provide an alternative paradigm and represent Dalit women's subjectivity as victims as well as agents in the narrative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abhinav. That was wonderful. Of course, you are reading, but I didn't want to intervene there. Anyway, you have done it, and in fact, the way you have brought out these writings of the Kaveri and Megwals, Sumangali and Mangali, and try to position them in the context of this class, gender, caste hierarchy, and all those nexus was so to say. Of course, it's wonderful, and these writings have many things to suggest. Any questions or observations we have for Avinav? Do you have any questions, comments? Quickly, if we have, otherwise we will move to the next presenter, and then maybe we can get back to his paper later on. Any quick comments, questions? I think there is no question or something. If there are any questions, people can write them, and they can put this in the chat box. Okay, so maybe we can come back later on. So I think we are moving to the next. Next presenter is Somishra Rai. Uh, Somishra Rai. What's the name? Am I reading it correct? Uh, yeah. Next is Mosrisha Rai. It's when God is handicapped, reading through the multiple layers of marginalization in Arundhati Roy. So not Rai, Roy. Mosrisha Roy. I had seen her, I think, there. Mosrisha Roy, are you there? She was there, I think.
Sir, she seemed to be facing some network issues, so I think she.
Okay, so we move to the next presenter then.
Yes, sir. Let's do that. And also, Priyank, you want to be presented.
Okay. So that means sixth one is here.
Fourth one, Millie Ashwarya, if she's.
Okay, Millie. Okay, Millie Ashwarya. Okay. Yes, Millie. You can go ahead. In fact, I have to I have to go back to my mail and check the presenter or the topic of our presentation. Let's see what's her topic is. Wait. Yes. Millie has to present on understanding untouchability through the politics of food practices. So Millie Ashwarya.
Thank you so much,
This
sir.
seems to be a very promising paper from the title
Thank you,
itself.
sir.
I can, yes.
I have although altered the topic a little bit. So, my topic would be understanding resistance through the politics of Dalit food practices. So, in my presentation, I will deal with the whole history of beef eating, and then I will come to the present scenario wherein there are many beef festivals organized all over the country, and then the conflict that somehow comes in, seeps in. So I will begin with a quotation by Dr. Ambedkar, and I quote: "If beef eating had remained such a war between those who ate beef and those who did not, would not have arisen. Unfortunately, beef eating, instead of being treated as a purely secular matter, was made a matter of religion, and this happened because the Brahmins made the cow a sacred animal. This made beef eating a sacrilege." Unquote. So, Dr. Ambedkar's investigation into the matter of food practices of Dalits, it creates a link between the dead cows to the sacred ones and allows this inquiry into several strands of Dalit oppression that remain detached from the general Dalit discourse. Dalit identity is not merely revealed through their distinctive culture, but also through their lack of choice pertaining to their food habits existing not as Dalit food, but the food of the Dalits, referring to the very absence of the desired power over the availability of the food for them. Now, several scholarly work around food practices have increased because of the recent violence meted out against
Dalits and Muslims all over the country, accusing them of defiling the culture and Hindu traditions, being insensitive towards them. And food practices have more or less taken the shape of political tools of religious imposition. Now, it becomes very important to encounter the very subject of defilement by understanding how the Brahmins became vegetarians in the first place, and how the broken men, Dalits or the so-called broken men, became sacrilegious for consuming beef by taking into account the hypocrisies of the upper castes and their sanctioned oppression in the name of contamination, and the untouchables being its active carriers. The private has become public and political, backed up by caste rules pertaining to the Hindu centric perception of the country. Dalit lifestyle is ruptured and analyzed, which again pushes the theoretical approach of Dalit culture to fit into the philosophical tenets of the good and the bad, the pure and the impure, and by engaging with the food hierarchy created for the so called civilized society. Dalits or the broken men have far too often been pushed towards the periphery of wherein the subaltern, centurial oppression has taken away from them the very pride that they would have in their existence. Now, food is a reflection of the myriad cultural processes operating in a society, and in a multicultural country like India, such choices often get affected by state agencies, and the underprivileged sections of the country, including Dalits and other backward castes, often lack this choice in the first place, which I had pointed towards in the very beginning of the presentation. Now, if we talk about the culture of beef eating, it did not occur to them as a choice but as a necessity, since beef was cheaper than many vegetables and its protein content was higher. In order to avoid many chronic diseases, its consumption came into being. The notions of the profane and polluted seep into the politics of caste struggles on the basis of food practices, and the already othered identity of Dalits is further justified through religious hierarchization. Now, Periyar, Ramasamy, as well as Dr. Ambedkar, they had picturized this connection between Dalits, untouchability, and beef eating in their respective books. Periyar, he theorized upon the understanding that Dalits have not been given enough opportunities for survival. So, even if they did or do consume beef, the fault does not lie within that section, but it clearly somehow reveals an unfair and unbalanced system that provides them with that lack in the very first place. So if such marginalized sections they stop their consumption of beef, it would not allow them to mingle with the upper caste Hindus. Like, that is a utopian idea that would never happen, or even to imagine themselves having an identity devoid of the societal constructed notion of untouchability that is often that they are branded with. Ambedkar, in his book The Untouchables, he mentions how in the Rigved, following Indra's instructions, his men were made to participate in the sacrificial act of killing more than 15 oxen in order to please the gods. Furthermore, he states the Kamyashtis were also involved in such sacrifices. Not only were cows and oxen killed, but there were specific selection processes and criteria involved for the perpetual act. By focalizing Atreya Brahman, he reveals how it was a part of age-old rituals and then traces it to the Gupta period. He then draws a connection of the beginning of untouchability with beef eating and the hatred of Brahmins towards Buddhists because of the whole idea of conversion, and they had to somehow suppress them. So Ambedkar's probing into the ancient references, it throws light on the custom of beef eating, and how cow sacrifice intercepted with the proclamations of the so-called touchable Hindus. Various Shastras also shed light on the fact that the prohibition was never on beef eating, but only on excess slaughtering. Dalit conversion into Buddhism and their acceptance of a new identity did not save them from the biasness of the upper caste Hindus, and were made targets of hate and impurity because of their food practices. The oppressive nature of the hegemonic Hindu society amalgamated with agrarian economy, and it worsened the state of affairs of these weaker sections. Post-conversion, of Dalits to Buddhism, the dire need of Brahmins was to reclaim the lost power in society following this rise, in this the entire conversion process. And this was followed by a ban on beef consumption put forward by the Gupta kings. The practice was as exclusive as it could have been, arousing the participation of the upper caste Hindus. But then, what were the reasons behind the practice of beef eating, a mere marker of caste of Dalits? A modern rendition of reworking upon such theorization has been taken up by the renowned historian D.N. Jha in his book Myth of the Holy Cow, which deals with rewriting the glorified past of Hindus, and it retells the Vedic tales, and reinvents them in order to fit into the narrative of the development of the Holy Cow. And I would quote, he says, the Mahabharata also makes a laudatory reference to the king Rantideva, in whose kitchen 2,000 cows were butchered each day, their flesh along with grain being distributed among the Brahmins. The reason why such a statement is important in the present scenario lies in the contemporary state of the country, wherein the mere possession of cow flesh, it justifies manslaughter. What becomes even more erroneous is the act of regulating such practices with the use of state sanctioned violence. There have been quite too many incidents reflecting the state of Dalits being beaten up for the possession of beef, and then what the very idea is to push them on towards the periphery. Anand Teltumde, in his article titled The Holy Cow, he reiterates the idea that vegetarianism amongst Hindus is nothing but a myth kept alive by, I would quote, hypocritical hegemonic upper caste Hindus, and who constitute only 15% of the population. Being a multicultural nation where the food habits of its citizens become a part of their identities, the formulation of laws banning the consumption of beef stands to curb the liberties of Dalits, which in turn makes way towards oppression by imposing state-mandated restrictions on their identities. Facing such socio-cultural discrimination and remaining economically marginalized in a way defines the identity of such alienated groups, and the stigma created around their existence is further canonized by the Hindu law and courts. What becomes important in today's presentation is to take into cognizance how small acts of resistance have always been followed by fights breaking out at several places, including Hyderabad's English and Foreign Languages University in April 2011 over a beef festival, which was organized by the Dalit Adivasi Bahujan Minority Students Association and the Tilangrit, the birthplace of Gandhi. In a similar manner, the oppressed communities again faced conflict in Osmania University in Hyderabad, which witnessed the participation of Dalits, Shudras, Adivasis, as well as Muslim students in a beef-themed food festival in 2012 to mark Ambedkar's birth anniversary. So cooking beef in a room is not sentimental, but openly celebrating is problematic for these people, because the public sphere belongs to the hegemonic culture that is Brahminism. In India, the public sphere is not yet public, not for Muslims, not for Buddhists, not for Dalits, of course, and only for the upper caste Hindus. The public space in India, the public sphere in India is private space, and this is what Kancha Ilaya says, and I quote, private space for Hindu Brahminical forces, and thus nobody else can enter into this public space, unquote. It is very important to understand Michel Desserti, who is a French philosopher. He talks in his book, The Practice of Everyday Life Practices, Practice of Everyday Life, and it provides a powerful lens to engage with the everyday lives of the oppressed masses in terms of their cultural practices, rituals, as well as myths that somehow undermine the traditions. In order to escape the dominant imposition and to create sort of a resistance against this normalized idea of eating practices, such festivals like the beef eating festivals, they create they challenge the upper caste, using the tactic of visible confrontation. So the individual practice of beef eating, metamorphosis into and interference into the organisms. Such practices of the subaltern describe distortions of strategies of power and thus can be defined as resistance stemming from daily life practices, because by producing and reproducing newer forms of parallel, discursive arena where members of the oppressed classes, where the members of the subordinate social groups, they invent and circulate counter discourses to formulate, oppositional interpretations of their identities, uh, and interests and needs too. And the public sphere of India, it has historically remained Brahmanical and hegemonic in sidelining and invisibilizing, the Dalits from the public sphere, leading to a complete absence of Dalits from the mainstream media or the public sphere. And this is evident from the countercultures that Dalits have created in the form of beef festivals or other contemporary, cultural practices, which create this parallel discourse of the commons, we could say, alongside the mainstream. Now, this act of resistance, this act of organizing beef festival in the midst of this surveillance that they are constantly in, itself is a political statement revealed by the community, and it tries to say something. It tries to assert this idea, this sort of an ideology, and that assertion becomes very important because it somehow gives voice and space to the marginalized sections of the society, and it's an attempt, I would say, in this unequal society, in this unequal country or space. Thank you so much.
Uh, thank you so much, Millie. It was a well argued paper. And is there any questions, observations, comments? We have next paper, which is also similar to it. So maybe we can quickly go to that. If we don't have any particular question here, we can get back again as it is happening. So please, folks, we can put it in the chat box if we have any comments or questions to make. So we are going to the next presentation. Next is by Priyanka Singh. Do we have Priyanka?
So sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Priyanka Singh is absent.
Okay.
But I think
Divyani.
Marisha Roy is back, right?
Okay. Marisha Roy is back.
Yes.
Okay, so then we are going ahead with her. So her topic is When God is Handicapped, reading through the multiple layers of marginalization in Arundhati Roy. So Marisha, go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are ready. Go ahead.
Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to mention that there has been a typing mistake probably in the conference schedule of the title of my paper. So the actual title is When God is Handicapped, Reading Through the Multiple Layers of Marginalization in Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. So I am beginning my presentation then. The God of Small Things is one-armed. In spite of being a god, he is handicapped and therefore he cannot perform grand miracles. This physical disability, along with his inconsequence and indifference, symbolically suggests an incompleteness, a limitation in his divine power, thus rendering him a marginal position of godhood, far from the center of power. He is therefore incapable of fully bringing light in the people he protects, thus making the small man shine only timidly like the mombatti and not brightly like the lantern, that is the big man. In a world where God himself is marginalized, it is not surprising that marginalization functioning on multiple variety. In The God of Small Things, Arundhati Roy portrays how different kinds of marginalization function together and rather interconnectedly in the Indian society. So these different kinds of marginalization often intersect, thus problematizing the victim-perpetrator relationship. Since the distinction between the oppressor and the oppressed gets blurred, and these positions become interchangeable. While caste based marginalization is at the very core of the novel, marginalizations on the basis of other factors like race, class, and gender also play very significant roles in shaping the happenings of the novel. At the very base of the central catastrophe, which kills not only Velutha and Sophie Mole, but also shatters the lives of Ammu, Estha, and Rahel, is the caste system. Syrian Christians are upper caste, and therefore they belong to the center of the society. On the other hand, the Paravans are not only lower caste but also untouchables. Therefore, they are viewed as being of less value as human beings and as belonging from the outside of the mainstream society. In the history of caste, as described in the God of Small Things, the Paravans were not allowed to touch anything which the touchables touch. They were not allowed to walk on sorry, they were not allowed to walk on public roads or to cover their upper bodies or to carry umbrellas. They had to put their hands over their mouths whenever they spoke in order to divert their polluted breath. They were expected to crawl backwards with a broom, sweeping away their footprints so that the Brahmins or Syrian Christians would not defile themselves by accidentally stepping into a Parahan's footprint. Now, although these operations become less crude with time, and Velutha, an untouchable, is allowed to work in the factory, nevertheless, the Paravans remains the same. In spite of being more skilled, Velutha is paid less than the touchable workers, and permitting him to enter the factory is itself considered as an act of mercy by Mamachi. Therefore, when Ammu, the daughter of a prestigious Syrian Christian household, is found to be in a relationship with him, her family members view this relationship as a matter of utter contempt, as a disgrace which must be put to an end. Even Velia, auditioned into the caste system, believes that he should repent for this sin of his son by brutally killing Velutha. In the attempt to recover the family reputation, which is brought at stake by this scandalous relationship, Baby Kochama lodges a false complaint to the police, accusing Velutha of attempting to rape Ammu and of kidnapping the three children and murdering one of them. Although later Ammu tells the truth to the police, they still ignore and insult her because the touchable inspector cannot accept this negation of the caste-based marginalization. So the police not only torture Velutha to death, but in their attempt to hide the evidence of lodging and acting on the basis of a false FIR, Devi Kochama and the police together create extreme psychological pressure on little Esther and Rahel, thus traumatizing them to such an extent that Esther is compelled to identify Velutha as their kidnapper. The guilt and trauma created by this event continues to haunt the twins into adulthood, thus leading to Esther's abnormal quietness and Rahel's feeling of emptiness. Ammo is thrown out of the house in punishment of jeopardizing family reputation, leading to her painful struggle for survival and ultimately to her death. Lives of Chaco and Margaret also become devastated by the death of their only daughter. Thus, the caste system shatters all these characters. In the patriarchal society, one of the strongest forms of marginalization is also always sexism, as is evident in Papachi's act of inflicting physical violence on his wife by beating her every night with a brass flower vase unless Chaco stops him. He also denies Ammu college education because, according to him, it is an unnecessary expense for a girl. Mamachi and Baby Kochama, being women themselves, also show similar patriarchal mindset in their attitude towards Chaco and Ammu. Both Chaco and Ammu marry outside their clan and get divorced after having children, thus being in very similar positions. But they are treated very differently. While Ammu is constantly reminded that she and her children are unwanted burdens, Chaco is treated as, and I quote, the man of the house, unquote. And he is given complete right over the property. He is allowed not only to take control over Mamachi's pickle factory, although he ruins it, but also to throw Ammu out of the house and to decide the future of her children. Whereas Ammu's affair with Velutha is viewed as a huge transgression, Chaco's sexual desire is sanctioned as man's needs, and the satisfaction of his feudal libido through sexual relationships with the poor female factory workers is actively supported by Mamachi, who pays them and builds a separate door for their entrance. Another important factor of marginalization in post-colonial India is race. So Papachi's Anglophilia is evident in his attitudes and appearances. To follow the English, he wears a three-piece suit even in the hot climate of Ayamanem. He believes in the moral supremacy of the whites so blindly that he thinks an Englishman can never covet someone else's wife, and therefore he refuses to trust the lived experience of his own daughter. However, this racial attitude is not something specific to him. It pervades almost the entire society. The grand welcome of Chaco's ex-wife Margaret and their daughter Sophie, both of whom love Joe much more than Chaco, is not just because they are related to Chaco, who is the man of the house, but because being whites, they automatically gain a superior position in the Indian psyche. The crowd of the factory workers to watch these guests and the abusive orange drink lemon drink man's awe after hearing of English relatives further intensify this Anglophilia. However, interestingly, Chaco, who is proud to have a white wife and a white daughter, has himself been a victim of racism when Margaret's family refused to accept him as her husband. Nonetheless, in spite of this Anglophilia, Mamachi despises Margaret and views her as shopkeeper's daughter. The reason behind her disliking Margaret is not only her possessiveness about her son, but also Margaret's class status. Mamachi, who boasts of her class superiority at every wedding she is invited to, cannot accept a working class woman as her daughter-in-law. So here class becomes more important than race. Chaco's attitude to class is, however, not so linear. A self-proclaimed Marxist and a committed supporter of the Communist Party, he makes his factory laborers aware of labor rights and trade union laws. He calls them comrades and makes them sit at the same table with him to drink tea. But his attempt of creating class equality is nothing but a pretext, a facade of flirting with the female workers. Further, he sexually exploits some of these women, proving that Mamachi is right in thinking his communist ideology as nothing but, and I quote, an Oxford avatar of the old Zamindar mentality. Unquote. Thus, different factors of marginalization become powerful at different points, thus implying that the actual functional force of marginalization is none of them but the power dialectic. Whether a factor of marginalization will be accepted or ignored, that depends on the power position of the person concerned. That's why the police misuse their power in torturing not only the untouchable, powerless Velutha without any evidence, but also in abusing Ammu, who belongs to an upper class, respectable family, both verbally and sexually, just because she lacks power. This exploitation of power is further highlighted by the inquiry of the police about Velutha's political position before torturing him. Therefore, marginality is nothing but the result of what Nietzsche calls the will to power. But Arundhati Roy not only portrays the prevalent forms of marginalization but also revolts against it through both the content and the structure of her novel. She uses neither of the two conventional narrative modes, which are dominant and therefore central to the world of fiction. So the events of this novel are arranged neither linearly nor circularly. Rather, they are scattered throughout the novel, making the novel constantly oscillate between present and past. Also, Roy incorporates into the narrative the authenticity of first-person narrative into the impartiality of third-person narrative by often using the children's voice as focalizers, particularly in depicting the children's experiences. The result is not only the inclusion of phonetic versions of the words mispronounced by children or journeys into child psychology, but also the irony that even though the story is being told from the perspectives of children, still often the readers share such understandings or perceptions with the narrative voice to which the children have absolutely no access. One of the central motifs of the novel is the centrality of the love laws, that is, the societal rules which decide who is to be loved, in what manner, and how much. Thus, these love laws create a center margin relationship among different forms of love also. The loves which are sanctioned or approved by love laws are socially glorified, whereas the other forms of love are condemned. When Ammu, a divorced upper caste woman with children, falls in love with an untouchable, she is not only defying the caste system but is also breaking the love laws. Roy, however, revolts against these love laws through both the actual and the structural endings of her novel. The ultimate union between Rahel and Destha is an act of incest, and ending the novel with this incestuous expression of love, Roy suggests that love does not need to be bound by any rules or any classification. Also, by placing the chapter The Cost of Living, which contains the actual description of Ammu and Felutha's relationship, structurally at the final position of the novel, Roy not only sings the trance song of a love which breaks all barriers, but she also ends the novel with the promise of a tomorrow, with the hope of a new day when love will win against all the odds of marginalization. Thank you. And thank you for listening to me so patiently. So I am turning off my audio and video. If you have any questions, please ask me.
Thank you so much, Mashrisha. It was wonderful to to see the multiple layers of marginalization. In fact, it was such a kind of a treat to see that you have looked at the different subject positions like race, gender, caste, class, all those all those four together in Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. That was wonderful, and I hope it should elicit some at least some appreciation, if not questions and comments. So, is there any questions, comments? If then quickly let's have those. Otherwise, we'll move to the other ones. Do we have any questions, comments? I think the similar with the other, just like others. We don't have any probably here right now. People are all in the thinking mode. I think. Yeah, there are so many questions. Yes, but not there are people have written the papers selected with thorough scrutiny. We cannot allow now. Okay. So Prati has written something about that. Okay. Tejaswini had said no. Okay. So I think Dr. Prati has given that thing. We have gone ahead and okay. So there are no question as such about this particular paper. So I think we are moving ahead with the next presentation. Next is Priyanka. Is it Priyanka?
No, sir, Priyanka is absent. So our next presenter will be Devayan Nag.
Okay. So we are coming to Devayan Nag. His topic is right here. Glimpses of Hierarchy and Caste Marginality, a study on the nature of revolt in the life of in the life narratives of Dalit women. So this also seems to be a promising one. Devayan, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here. Am I audible?
Okay, yes. So go ahead.
Okay. Yes. The title of my paper is Glimpses of Hierarchy and Caste Marginality, a study on the nature of revolt in the life narratives of Dalit women. I begin my paper with an extract from a poem. The poem is Under Dadar Bridge by Prakash Jadhav. He writes, "You are not a Hindu or a Muslim, you are You are an abundant spark of the world's lusty fires. These lines, which were originally written in Marathi, were steeped in agony and the burden of an inner sanctum of consciousness and freedom that was fractured by decades of tradition, this being one of the many narrative voices of rebellion so popularized in Dalit literature. The liberation from marginality, influenced by the actions of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was in pursuit of bringing about a social revolution against every manner of exclusion on casteist grounds. As Ambedkar himself said, we must uproot the four caste system and untouchability and set the society on the foundation of the two principles of one caste and of equality. The initiation of the Dalit literary movement, organized as a result, helped the Indian underprivileged lower caste identify their position in a society, culture, and tradition. The reflection of atrocities inflicted upon by caste brought forth this new and separate quote-unquote literature of revolt by Dalit writers, as Gail Omfeth referred in the preface to Poisoned Bread. But what was this tradition? How did it go about exploiting and excluding one section of society by privileging another? And how was this revolt voiced by Dalit writers in their separate literature? I shall seek to answer these questions by taking into consideration the aspects of language and religion in particular. I will focus on the narrative genre of autobiography by Dalit women writers, and for this I will be taking two translated texts, one by Kumud Paude called Antasfot, meaning outburst, and the other by the Christian woman writer Bama, her testimony Karukku. Now, the reason I considered two texts from different parts of India, one being Marathi and the other Tamil, was the fact that the Dalit movement had its strongholds in Maharashtra, but which, despite losing its initial efflorescence, had a strong flow in other Indian states as languages, which was observed by Omfeth. The separate minor communities in the subcontinent follow their individual cultures and religion, but in terms of caste bondage and oppression by the white collars, many of them suffered from the same sense of what Marx would call false consciousness. As he said, ideology prevents the recognition of oppression by the oppressed, a veil that prevents the oppressed from proper understanding of their condition. Ambedkar referred to the same thing as a caste feudal bondage, stating that this mental slavery of seeing the bondage to be their right as the reason that held back Dalits and other subordinated communities backwards. On the other hand, K.M. Panikar also clarified how caste and democracy are binaries founded on strongly irreconcilable ideologies. As he said, democracy and caste are totally opposed, as one is actuated by the principles of social inclusion, the other by those of social exclusion. Democracy tries to break down the barriers of class, caste seeks to perpetuate them. This obliteration of consciousness of the very identity of being marginal has also been elaborated upon earlier by Sharan Kumar Limbale, who stated, Dalit consciousness makes slaves conscious of their slavery, for which any revolutionary mentality becomes a social responsibility. This bondage, leading to socio-religious exclusion, was accentuated in various forms. It became a means of exploitation, and Kumud Paude, in a way, attempted to break this bondage by fighting for and upholding what she considered to be her true right. Her form of rebellion was a silent, skeptical one, a deliberate refusal to accept compliments. Paude had postgraduated in Sanskrit, traditionally regarded to be an elitist language meant only for the Brahmins. When she got an assistant lectureship and later became a professor of the famous Morris College, where she studied, she received several compliments. In Antasfot, she stated, when I hear myself praised, it's like being stung by a lot of gadflies. As a result, I look askance at the person praising me. The reason is that the tradition of casteism made it unsettling for the Indian mind to combine such a sacred language and an underprivileged, socially discarded Mahar community from which she originated. This led to her being a victim of a traditional mindset that tormented her using ironic and sarcastic comments, such as, well, isn't that amazing? So you're teaching Sanskrit at a government college, are you? Or, all our sacred scriptures have been polluted. Or even, it's all over, Kali Yuga has dawned. After all, they are the government's favorite sons-in-law. Though Paude is writing in post-independent India, this ideology of discrimination is still strongly grounded, and though Dalits have earned their liberation outwardly, casteism kept their inner self bound by conflict, struggle, and anxiety. So what began as a struggle to break free from tradition and attain her goal continued even after she earned her place in society. As she said, what comes by birth but can't be cast off by dying, that is caste. Her form of rebellion was to reciprocate with this very weapon of oppression that had alienated her all her life. In the felicitation ceremony at Nagpur on the Vijaya Dashami day of 1971, her introductory speech in Sanskrit reverberated her mixture of emotions, having both a sense of anxiety and pride. To quote her, whereas our traditional books have forbidden the study of Sanskrit by women and Shudras, a woman from those very Shudras, from the lowliest caste among them, will today, in Sanskrit, introduce the scholars. The response which followed at her attempt to enter an objectionable social hierarchy considered a reflection of mixed emotion among the multi-caste audience, such as frustration of the defeated, fury of the traditionalists, respect of acquaintances, and hostility and disgust of others. Kumut Paude's revolt against the orthodox Brahmins did not begin only after her lectureship. Her whole life was reminiscent of this act. Her curiosity towards learning Sanskrit was not inborn, it was aroused when, uninvited, she secretly visited the thread ceremony of an upper caste classmate's brother. There she witnessed the Brahminical ceremony in a pandal, the sacrificial fire, and the Vedic ritual chants of Swaha that attracted her. Her sense of self-respect was injured when, on being discovered, she, being a Mahar, was driven out like a beggar. So is her devotion to learning Sanskrit a desire only to stand firm against this imposed restriction to learn, as well as other acts of exclusion meted out by the conventional ideology? Or is it a genuine and natural eagerness to learn an elite language? The answer is not completely certain, because she did not receive opposition only from the ivory tower Hindus. There were people from her own community who laughed at her interest in studying Sanskrit and who constantly reminded her of her situational limitations. This was a result of stubbornly adhering to those systems of beliefs, the notion that hegemony is legitimate, a submission to traditionalism. Therefore, it can be stated that this revolt was an individual struggle, carried out only by her, what Gramsci would call a passive revolution, as he mentioned in prison notebooks, because it did not involve a quote-unquote social group which led other groups, but a state which led the group which should have been leading. Only here, it was not the state, but the religious structure which influenced the consciousness of the community. During her college period, she experienced more of this stagnant ideology that shone in a similar attitude of dislike at her receiving a scholarship, from the lowly peons to the senior officials. Reformers from the lower caste would mock her ability to teach, calling her government Brahmin. The truth is that Paude was idealistic, but not in the sense she was considered by the then Chief Minister of Maharashtra. Her act of revolt back then was only a means of survival. She protested against the hypocritical promises of a job as she was starving. When unemployed after receiving her master's degree, she presented her case to the central cabinet minister Sri Jagjeevan Ram, stating, "I condemn the flimsy pretense of the state government and the administration that flouted the constitution." In a similar manner, Bama, the teacher of mathematics in Uthira Meru, witnessed and underwent a similar kind of stigmatized experience with her family in the Tamil Paraya community, real tradition, he greater detail the atrocities committed by the upper caste Naikar community and the violence of casteism, which is the chief reason his autobiography was chosen. As Bama's nature as an outspoken rebel displayed in her narrative technique was some way different from Paude. By elaborating the horrific events of untouchability and Christianity she witnessed during her childhood and later as a nun, she rather speaks through the reader's consciousness. Karukku makes readers realize without a doubt what Anna Bhau Sathe from the Hmong community proclaimed in his poem Take a Hammer to Change the World. The rich have exploited us without end, the priests have tortured us. The sight of her mother vomiting blood after carrying a heavy load, the irrational beating of the men in her village by hired policemen and gundas over the right of a cemetery were but some of these instances of violence. Bama churned this Dalit rebellion by voicing the oppressive structure. The Paraya community were mostly agricultural laborers who lived by fishing, gathering, and selling firewood. The village they lived in had no proper tasks allotted to them, for which they and their neighboring pallars had to undertake menial chores on a contractual basis. Again, most of the land belonged to the Naikar community. The post office, the panchayat board, the milk depot, big shops, the church, the schools, all these stood in their streets. The existence of untouchability was revealed before her when she witnessed an elder from her community holding a packet by its string without touching it, as he had to give it to a Naikar. It was the embedded ideology that Naikars, being the white collars, must not touch Parayas to avoid getting polluted, that was also mentioned by Paude. Bama's personal struggle with identity began when she questioned the manner her community was discriminated. As she asked, what did it mean when they call us Paraya? Had the name become that obscene? She said this, but only later realization dawned upon her about the existence of hegemony, the domination not just through violence, but by winning the consent of the upper caste to be governed and dominated. And here the consent is masked in their being dependent on the Naikars for survival. As her grandmother had revealed to her, these people are the Maharajas who feed us our rice. Without them, how will we survive? In order to keep the hegemony invisible, it was necessary that the Parayas accept untouchability as natural, inevitable, and good. And the community would never complain. Most of them accepted the toil they had to endure as something inevitable and began to see themselves the way the Naikars saw them, what W.E.B. Du Bois called double consciousness. But can the same thing be stated about Bama when she questioned her identity and treatment? By her very act of interrogating, she did not accept the existing tradition without doubt, and later began acting upon it as a teacher, helping lower caste people, fighting for their equal treatment, and later for the sole purpose only, leaving the confines of the convent. She realized as a convent nun that all claims of equality in God's eyes and limitless love were a mere outward display. For, as she states, the Jesus they worshipped there was a wealthy Jesus. When outsiders arrived flaunting their wealth, they were treated with one sort of love. If they did not have these things, I am not sure there was any love at all in this case. The upper class Christians used the convent religion as an institution to imbibe the Dalit class by provoking a blind belief. By highlighting this imposed devotion, Bama's attack was directed against this institution by showing its inner hypocrisy. In a non-linear narrative using flashback techniques, in Karukku she provided a direct response voicing the need to rebel against these social and religious institutions so that they are no longer provoked into constant submission. The Dalit literature of revolt was a form of resistance against this traditional structure established by caste. As Pramod Nair had said, resistance literature in every culture, be it working class poetry, anti-colonial writings, or women's narratives, has provided ideologies different from the acceptable ones. The act of rebellion expressed was in response to the act of creating a new ideology different from the established ones in documents such as Manusmriti, Dharma, or Swadharma, or Brahminic slavery. Where Kumud Paude and Bama have been successful in problematizing ways of looking at cultural tradition, building a separate ideology through separate literature was not an easy task. As Arjun Dangle had pointed out, Marathi literary tradition is about 900 years old, while that of Dalit literature is hardly 60 to 70 years old. The asceticism began in response to an awakened self of the Dalits, brought forth by this voice of rebellion, revolt, that encouraged them and continue to encourage them to accept new ideas of culture and social progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devian. That was wonderful. In fact, the way you brought out Kumud Paude and Bama's works and the way things have been problematized there, it's wonderful. I'm sure there would be many questions and comments. At least now that I think we are through with all the presentations. Do we have Priyanka's presentation yet? I don't think she's there, is it? Is she?
Yes, sir, she's absent. She's not here.
So I think we are all through with all the presentations, 5 presentations in all. So I can see that there is one comment by Saksham Arora. This is with reference to beef eating. In the current scenarios, considering various incidents that have led to violence, wouldn't it be prudent to shift to other sources of protein? Is price still a concern, or are beef eating events organized for simply purpose to highlight history of caste oppression? Any other points which may be relevant in contemporary society? Asking as a novice to understand this issue holistically. So I think this question is to Millie.
Yes, sir.
Millie, would you? Yes.
Thank you, Saksham. That is a good question. If we talk about the very history of beef eating, it was for mere sustenance. But when we talk about the beef festivals organized all around the country in different universities, they are obviously symbolic in nature, and they are reflection of this culture which was hijacked by the Brahmins, and how the very act of organizing beef eating festivals is a form of resistance coming from the Dalits, right? That they are claiming the space which was somehow in possession of the upper caste, Hindus. So in contemporary times, in contemporary society, obviously, there are other sources of protein, but beef is still cheaper than other food items that have protein in them. So why not? So I think that is symbolic in nature, and that is also a marker of this protest coming from the Dalit side, that this is our culture, and we will be out in the public with it. We will somehow portray our culture in front of the rest of the people who have for centuries marked us as the ones who are untouchables, who should be ostracized from the society. So yeah, it is symbolic, and it is a form of resistance. Thank you.
May I add to this, Saroj?
Yes, sure, please.
I think, yes, it is a symbol of protest, but beef eating is not restricted to Dalits alone. So, beef has been eaten, and I think if you go back to history, there is documented history that by and large, even the Aryans, there was this tradition of eating beef, and gradually that tradition has got lost. And Dalits, and if you go back to Ambedkar, you'll realize that even Ambedkar spoke, it's not beef eating. Ambedkar's, of course, coming from the Mahar community, and he was against eating of carrion, right? So beef eating as a form of protest, okay, but if you go to Kerala, Hindus and Muslims and Christians, everybody used to take beef, and beef eating is not restricted to the Dalits alone. So I think that distinction also needs to be factored in.
Yes, that was rightly said. In fact, Dalits, tribal population, Christian population, Muslim population, so all together, it's not just only a Dalit thing. And yes, but then as it was rightly said, it is also a mark of protest. So maybe, there is many diasporic Indians also eat beef. This is this is one comment from Tasnim Shehnaz. So not just diaspora, diaspora, of course, Indians there outside when they go. So that of course it happens. But within India, in different cross section, they do, and when people do it, of course, in their public and private space, when people the issue of public and private thing was coming. In the private space, of course, they do. Some of them do it even today, and but then when it happens in public, yes, it is definitely a mark of protest, a mark of protest, and mark of resistance. It is. And of course, when one looks at it in that way, one has to kind of go back in in one's understanding about the identity, idea of identity, identity, assertion of one's identity. Because ultimately, all the margin, whenever we talk about whether it is racial identity or caste identity or gender identity or tribal identity or any other local regional identity that one talks of, on the basis of which the marginalizations take place. So mostly, of course, it's not a kind of sequence that happens, but there is some stage or some phase comes in the history of that identity. It's called assertion, identity formation, and then assertion, and then celebration, something like that. So it need not be it need not be chronological, but that stage of assertion comes in. So it is in the process of this assertion, all these things happen. So and of course it's all it's in some way it's going to and fro, and the amount of bargaining that happens in the space of because normally when you talk about the margin, it's the idea of space that comes in, the socio-cultural political space. So how much of space one can have, so this is that kind of bargaining, it's a negotiation. So that is in play. So one has to look at it in that perspective. I think that's about that. Any other questions to any other presenters? Not just questions. In fact, there have been quite a few good points and of appreciations rather. So all our presenters, 5 presenters we had, they did their wonderful job. In fact, I have this sense of appreciation from the very beginning, because the younger population is looking into these contentious issues. These, whether it is caste, whether it is class, gender, and race, and all these things. See, when the younger population looks at it, it of course it leads to some kind of constructive. It's not just resistance and revolt, but in some way it is also it's kind of paving way for reconstruction of the society in egalitarian footing. So I think on that note, it is definitely a good kind of good gesture on our part, and not just gesture, a step on our part to deliberate on these things, these issues. So I'm happy that we have this younger generation, younger population doing it. Any other questions or comments that we have? Do you have any questions, comments? Tejaswini Rastogi says the presentation is very fine. Yeah, I'm sorry, Tejaswini, actually you had messaged I think earlier also about this. Yeah, and because of these constraints of selection and everything had been put in place also. That's how I think Dr. Brati answered you there, and yeah, we could not accommodate you. So that was there. Anything else? Yeah, if there is no more, and in fact we are kind of moving towards the kind of dead end. So let me go back to each one of them and have my whatever brief, whether some authorial or chair's remark or whatever one may say. Quickly, I will go back to each presenters and try to sum up, and some comment I will make. Starting with Tanu. Tanu did her presentation on caste gender nexus, and her promise was from the promise of the paper one expected, and that she would talk about the works of Kausalya Vaisantri and Sushila Tagore, and how in their works this caste gender nexus comes in, and how these two come up to actually make for some kind of intervention in the today's society. It was a brilliant proposition, but I think she could not, manage to come up with much comment on Kausalya and Sushila, because had she somehow kind of spent slightly more time in in foregrounding the idea of kind of public space, private space, and all those things. So otherwise her proposition, her present is definitely wonderful, because if one has to look at caste, of course, caste is a huge leviathan. It's a huge phenomena. It's a if one talks about not just Indian society but also the South Asian society, and of course wherever Indians go, Indians take caste along, and so wherever South Asians go, they also take caste along. So diasporic society and all those. So when one talks about caste, now it's one talks about, say, Leviathan, which to use the words of Ambedkar, and when even Rajkumar was also referring to this annihilation, whose annihilation is near to impossible. Ambedkar says this in Annihilation of Caste. He says it's well nigh impossible. So why is it? How is it this well nigh impossible? Even the the authority, like Ambedkar talks about this caste, annihilation of caste is well nigh impossible. So why does that happen? So the very crux of that is not just only the scriptures and all those things that he talks of. Even to my mind, and in fact Tanu would agree, and probably other presenters would also agree, it is the gender. Because of gender, actually caste becomes thoroughly ingrained in the society. Because if you have to capture a society, capture the women. So that has been the case throughout, not just in India but everywhere. So whether it is Hinduism or whether it is Brahmanism, or we say give whatever name you are, or Islam or any other. So if you have to capture the society, capture the women. So this endogamy that happens, and through the women, through the gender perspective, ultimately caste prolongs. It lingers and goes on. The persistence of caste, to borrow the phrase from Anand Teltumbre, it is impossible unless it persists among the women. So the gender caste nexus, actually the caste is the slower thing. So the gender is the more important and a far more nefarious thing. So unless gender, one cannot actually understand caste. So I think that's what Tanu should, I think, pay attention to, and maybe others also take a cue from there. So that was Tanu's thing, and then we moved to Abhinav's presentation. Abhinav was talking about Hindi short fictions, and then there. So slightly it was kind of going into the narratives and all those things. Yes, because in today's time we need to look at the to look at not just only ideas of this resistance and all this thing, but as in fact Laura Broek, in fact Tanu had said that Laura Broek was being referred by Tanu. So in today's writing, Dalit writings and other writings, in fact the nuances of narratives have to be looked at. Not just only there are not just only the resistance and revolt, but you have to have the nuance, and one needs to look at them in their proper right. So they are not just only Dalit literature as such. So they are also literature. In fact, there is this voice coming in today's university circles that why should one just have Dalit literature as Dalit literature? But why not as part of writings in Indian writings? So why should they be only treated? Yes, being the identity-based writing, Dalit literature has its space. It has gone global. But one needs to look at the nuances, and they have the same space just as any other Premchand's writing or Arundhati Roy's writing and other things. They should be given that space. So that's how. So those aspects are important, and in fact, to some extent, Abhinav tried to address those concerns through the understanding of those things, and that was wonderful. And since not many, rather, in fact, since many people didn't have any questions, so that's how I had to put these things. This is a kind of comment and rather a compliment to Abhinav. And then we have Mosrisha's thing. Mosrisha is a wonderful presentation she had. And in fact, race and all those stuff. She looked at different subject positions, as I had also referred earlier, different subject positions, and in Arundhati Roy's works, how race comes in, caste comes in, class comes in, and gender comes in, and all these things. And she was looking. There was one thing that she referred to, maybe will to power by Nishche that she was talking about. And maybe Moshisha, if you would like, maybe you can slightly maybe kind of come out with a little bit of explanation how this will to power, not exactly explanation, some slight elaboration to how will to power is related to marginality as such or not, or if you are probably, if I missed out, if whether you said it marginalization, because as far as I can think of, will to power is instrumental in marginalizing. So not marginality as such, but marginalizing. So if that is the case, and if you maybe if you disagree or maybe you take a slightly different position, maybe you can come back and maybe elaborate on that. And then we are moving. Mosrisha, would you like to join there, or maybe you can come back after I have put my points?
Okay, sir.
After I have done, then you will come back?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then, yes, Millie's thing, then we had, Millie had come out very excellently, she did, about this food. And in fact, there was I think that was one singular question on the whole thing. So it's a powerful topic, a very powerful topic, vibrant, and today's time, and in fact, prior to this lockdown and all this COVID-induced thing, it was very much in the news, and it was it debatable. There are living almost a kind of living what you say, bombs exploding everywhere, and that kind of thing happening. So it's not that easy to address this concern, because this issue of food, and as I had said there, it's a resistance. Yes, at the very center of all these things is resistance, and so that's how she has taken up. And as suggested by others, the questions itself, could there be other modes of eating? So maybe is it only the food thing? Yes, but yes, of course there could be other modes, but yes, because this is a marker, because it's a marker. Considering large section of the population which thinks it, to put across the views, put across the ideas, and assert their identity, assert their positions on these matters of food and culture and all those things. So that's how, because you see, whether one likes it or not, there was this, the Indian society being a highly pluralistic society, it has got all kinds of threads, and whether we have Dalit, whether tribal, and whether you have a caste-based society, or the upper caste, lower caste, etc. This wide variety of people that we have, this it's difficult to actually put together that homogeneity in anything. So it's a very, very difficult thing, because even if someone talks about the central India, UP and MP or something, certain one kind of thing, go to northeast area, or Goa, or down south in Kerala, so you will not be able to portray the whole of India in one color. So that actually makes things not just difficult, but also it's in some way enriching if one can understand this. Understand this phenomena of this diversity of the country and the culture. So then that will be wonderful towards that egalitarian thing that we talk of. So that was Millie's thing. And then Devyan had talked about this Kumud Paude's and Mama's things and hierarchy. He was talking about the hierarchy, caste marginalization, and all these things. And he also referred to the Marxian concept of false consciousness. Yes, definitely. When one talks about the issue of caste, it's also false consciousness. So although I do not associate myself with Marxist thoughts, but definitely when one can talk about this concept, because the caste consciousness is actually a false consciousness. You see. So and when someone talks about this Dalit Chetana, that is again Sharan Kumar Limbale's this thing. Yes, and this Dalit Chetana, actually this Chetana is consciousness, and it means it has to have that all those apparatus and the will to get out of this false consciousness, to treat things head on, to cater to those things, and if it's challenged. So that's how this false consciousness has to be challenged. And if you have to use the words of Ambedkar, annihilate, which of course not that easy. As I had started with annihilation of caste is well nigh impossible. But this itself, the very recognition that it is a false consciousness itself, it gives us some kind of beginning. So that is definitely a crucial point to start with, while talking about caste thing. So that those caste representations are there in the works of this Kumud Paude and Bama, and then they have been fundamentally there, and they have been well read, in fact, well critiqued also, not just well critiqued there and throughout, and they are very seminal parts of Dalit literature. So overall, see, we had a wonderful session where all our presenters came out with their ideas, uh, and because it's part of writings from the margin, maybe it's just my personal suggestion to all of you. Maybe while we are talking about these things, and since I also teach, I was saying earlier in the beginning, because I also teach writings from the margin. So we need to we have to kind of broaden our perspectives from the perspective of uh, space, margin, center, space, center, margin, and in this context, although the text itself is a quite old one, centering the margin, it's by Ngungia Thiongo. It's not decolonization of the mind that I'm talking of. Decolonization of the mind was a different text. Later and after that, we had this centering the margin, this text, towards the pluralistic society, to a pluralism of culture. So this book kind of, it gives us some kind of some guiding line in that sense, about how we can go about it. Maybe a reference to that, towards pluralism of culture. Of course, assertion and reception and all these things are there part of it. But after that, what? The objective of this is towards a pluralism of culture, towards a pluralism of society. So decentering, is the first step in our studies in the margin, because ultimately the margin are in the process of negotiation and fight and conflict, or whatever one may say. So and decentering the center. So once the decentering is done, then what? Then it has to have that pluralism of the society. Then the margin becomes to the center. So that's how in the broader perspective, the center, this center margin relation, which we talk of. So there, all these different subject positions come into play, and our subject positions actually define this thing, and this will this particular webinar, this I think is going to be very kind of helpful in paving some ways, and the book or the text, whatever that it is coming up, that because I understand that Dr. Rati is coming out with a compilation of these things, and the books, so the articles will be published in book form. So this will, I hope, will pave the way, and it will turn out to be a very instrumental book and substantial intervention in the study of faith, in these writings from the margin. And this is all that I have to say. Anybody would like to pitch in, come in, Dr. Rati or anybody else? On
No,
you,
no, thank you, Saroj. Despite your busy schedule, you have, just accepted
no, thank
my
you, thank you.
invitation to come on board. We are really honored. I'll hand it over to Aaron now to sum up. Thank you officially.
Okay, so this was indeed a wonderful end to a very fruitful day. So thank you so much, Dr. Mahananda, and our wonderful presenters, Ms. Tanu Sharma, Mr. Abhinav Piyush, Ms. Mosvisha Roy, Ms. Mili Ashwarya, and Mr. Debayan Nag, for your presentations and for the very enriching discussions. I would like to request all the presenters to kindly put on your videos for a few seconds so that our student volunteers can take a picture. Okay. Priya, is it done? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. So I, on behalf of the organizing committee and the college, would like to express our sincerest Thanks and gratitude to our panel chair, Dr. Mahananda, our brilliant presenters, and all the participants for your contribution and also for your patience. We are so overwhelmed by the response that we have received today, and it's amazing to see how all people who are at the beginning of this session remained until the end, and we are so very grateful. This conference could not have been possible without your presence here with us today. And just a couple of
And
announcements.
Tejaswini, when we'll try and bring out the book, do share your mail ID with us. Did you send an abstract? Tejaswini, am I audible to you? Did you send in an abstract? I just wanted to know.
Ma'am, kindly allow
Ah,
me to send the abstract now. If you allow me tomorrow, I can read my paper. I can
no,
send
that
you
we cannot do
right
right
now.
now
Ma'am,
because
right now I can send my abstract if you allow me.
we will. What we will do is we will take it up during the publication time.
Thank you,
Did you
ma'am.
send an abstract? No, I don't think so because I don't recall remembering your abstract.
Ma'am, I was informed yesterday only about the conference, so I
Oh,
asked
I'm
for
so
the
sorry. Don't
link.
doesn't matter. When we'll be bringing out the book, please do share your email separately with us.
Yeah, ma'am.
And then send in the abstract,
Yes, ma'am, sure.
and we will consider it because we have not asked for full papers. So we'll be calling
Okay.
for full papers when we will be bringing out the book. So I think the
Thank
book
you.
is more lasting, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Where are you located, Tejaswini?
Ma'am, right now I am in Madhya Pradesh. Madhya
Oh,
Pradesh.
great. You're teaching?
Yes, ma'am. I am a government English teacher. I have done doctorate in English literature.
Please do share. Please just send in your abstract at the conference. If you have the conference mail, send it in, and
Yes,
just
ma'am.
like a note that we'll consider. We will send you the note when we were thinking of publication,
Thank you, ma'am.
and
Thank
we'll
you.
ask for your
So
papers
nice
then.
of you.
Okay?
Thank you.
Please, I'm sorry we couldn't because there is
It's
a
okay.
protocol. So
It's
the
okay,
protocol
ma'am.
we cannot breach the protocol. I'm really really sorry, but otherwise we will have to entertain others too,
Yes, ma'am.
right? But I am also overwhelmed with the response we have got, and we had to sift out lot. We got something around 85 plus abstracts, and we could just accommodate, I think, 49. So
Thank
thank
you.
you. And I think Vivek has put his camera on right now. तो एक और pic हो जाए. Can we just ask all our presenters to put on their mics? One of our faculty coordinators. उनका mic थोड़ा late आया है on. Millie, can you just put on your mic, on your camera too? विवेक कहाँ चले गए फिर से? Is Vivek on? कैमरा ऑन है ऑफ है? ऑन है? ओके. एक बार एक पिक ले लो. बच्चों को बोलो. And thank you all for participating and making our conference a success. Day 2 is yet to go. I think we
Yes,
can call
ma'am.
it a day.
First speaker.
Thank you everybody. And I think this couldn't happen without our student support. And thank you, Saroj, once over again. Waiting for the pandemic to get over and